I woke up to the usual sound of my alarm, that insistent beep that somehow feels personal when you're already awake at 5:30 a.m. There's something quiet about mornings like this, the kind where the world outside hasn't fully woken yet, and everything feels like it's holding its breath. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, just letting my eyes adjust, thinking about the staff meeting later. Today wasn't just another meeting. I'd spent weeks on this presentation. Every report, every chart, every figure had been triple-checked. I told myself, I've done the work. They can't ignore this. The coffee was the first real comfort. A small ritual that felt like grounding before stepping into a room full of people who'd probably try to cut you down before your first sentence even landed. The smell hit me, strong and bitter, curling through the kitchen. I let it linger as I straightened my uniform, adjusting the tie until it felt like armor. Polished shoes reflected the morning light coming through the window, a soft halo that made the office feel almost cinematic in its quiet perfection. As I walked through the office, there was that faint, almost imperceptible tension in the air. My coworkers moved about with that strange mix of casual indifference and something else I couldn't quite place. I caught a glance from Janice near the coffee machine. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and for a split second, I felt a prickle of unease. But I shrugged it off. No, I've done my part. Let them come at me if they dare. Sitting at my desk, I reviewed my notes one last time. Fingers tapping lightly against the table, pen hovering over my notebook, I felt that quiet swell of pride. Everything was aligned, every argument bulletproof, or so I thought. The sunlight shifted across the desk, and I noticed the dust motes floating lazily. Tiny witnesses to the calm before whatever storm was coming. That there's always that moment, right before a meeting like this, where you can almost hear the future whispering at the edges of the room. A sense that today might not be just ordinary. But I let the thought pass, focusing instead on the neat stack of papers in front of me, the steaming cup of coffee warming my hands, the comforting weight of the uniform on my shoulders. I was ready, or at least I told myself I was. The meeting room smelled faintly of old coffee and polished wood, a scent that somehow always reminded me of these gatherings, tense, quiet, and full of hidden judgments. I stepped in, papers in hand, feeling the polished floor under my shoes. The room felt bigger than usual, almost cavernous, and every chair seemed occupied by someone waiting for a misstep. As I approached the table, I caught the flicker of glances exchanged between coworkers. Quick, subtle, almost imperceptible looks, but enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing, telling myself, it's just nerves. They'll respect the work. That I sat down and spread my notes out carefully, aligning them like little soldiers ready for inspection. My pen hovered over my notebook, ready to emphasize the points I had rehearsed 100 times in the mirror. But there was a subtle shift in the air, the kind that makes you notice the tiny details. The way someone's foot tapped impatiently under the table, the slight smirk someone tried to hide behind their hand, the whisper of paper that seemed louder than it should. The meeting started, and I opened with my prepared speech. My voice was steady at first, precise, full of the confidence I'd nurtured over countless late nights and weekends. But then I noticed it, small interruptions, polite, almost invisible, but enough to start shaking that quiet pride. Comments that weren't questions, but jabs. Dismissive glances that made my stomach tighten. I glanced around, trying to catch anyone's supportive eye. Most were focused on their laptops or pretending to take notes, but I caught the corner of a smile from someone I barely knew. And it felt like a reminder that maybe this room had a way of chewing people up before they even got a chance to speak. Why? Is everyone looking at me like that? The thought crept in uninvited, sticky, and uncomfortable. My hands tightened around the edge of my notes. I tried to push it away, focusing on the data, the strategy, the hours I had poured into this presentation. But the small murmurs, the half-hidden chuckles behind screens, the subtle eye rolls, they began to worm their way into my mind. And suddenly the confidence I had walked in with felt fragile, almost laughable. And yet, I kept going. I had to, because stopping now would be surrender, and I wasn't ready to give them that. The first jab hit a little harder than I expected, a sarcastic comment from the very person whose approval I had counted on. I swallowed, forcing a nod, while inside, a quiet storm of disbelief and frustration started brewing. The calm I had carried into the room was slipping, and the subtle tension I had sensed from the hallway now wrapped around me like a tight, invisible grip. The meeting had barely begun, and already I could feel the narrative shifting, not in my favor. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a test. A test I hadn't signed up for, but one I was now trapped in. Then it happened. The moment that would replay in my mind for hours, maybe days, like a cruel little film. My superior leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, voice dripping with that kind of sarcasm that can cut deeper than anger ever could. "Oh, is that what you think is feasible, Lieutenant?" he said, letting the words hang in the air as though the entire room was in on a private joke. And somehow, I was the punchline that I froze for a heartbeat, caught off guard by the sheer audacity of it. My heart thudded painfully, and I could feel the blood rushing to my face. Did they just laugh at me? Here? Now? My hands clenched around my notes, crumpling them slightly, and I realized my voice had disappeared somewhere between my thoughts and the sound of that laugh. Not a polite chuckle. No, this was the kind that made you shrink, that carved into your confidence without warning. Coworkers tried to look elsewhere, pretend they weren't watching, but I caught them in the corner of my eye. Lips pressed tight, shoulders tensed, trying not to betray their amusement. A whisper floated across the table like a ghost. "Did you see that?" I wanted to scream, to tell them they had no right, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I sat there, heart racing, trying to find footing on the ground that had suddenly been ripped out from under me. That I remembered the late nights, hunched over my laptop in a half-lit room, coffee going cold beside me, meticulously cross-checking every number, every projection, every painstakingly created slide. And now it felt like it all meant nothing, like a castle of sand washed away before I even had a chance to defend it. A tiny, bitter voice in my head whispered, "All that effort. For what?" The room seemed to shrink, closing in from all sides. I could hear the scratching of pens, the shuffle of papers, the faint hum of the air conditioner, but it all blended into a haze of humiliation. My superior's smirk seemed to stretch across the walls themselves, mocking, relentless. And I realized something uncomfortable. It wasn't just him. The room had chosen its side. I was suddenly the outsider in my own carefully prepared world that I tried to steady my breathing, counting silently, willing the heat in my face to subside. But the sting of disbelief refused to fade. My pride, which had carried me through countless challenges, was now a fragile thing, dangling by a thread I wasn't sure I could hold. I wanted to retreat, to vanish, to sink into the nearest chair and disappear, but I stayed put, because somewhere deep inside, beneath the embarrassment, the sharp pang of injustice, there was still a small voice, quiet, stubborn, that refused to surrender. And I clung to it. Even as the room continued to spin, even as laughter and whispers danced around me like a storm I couldn't escape, that I walked out of that meeting like I was carrying the weight of the entire office on my shoulders. The hallway felt impossibly long, echoing with my footsteps in a way that made me feel smaller, invisible even, despite the fluorescent lights glaring down. My chest was tight, and each breath felt like it needed permission to escape. I clutched my notes, now rumpled and torn at the edges, like a tangible reminder of everything I thought I had controlled slipping away. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I never was, I thought, the words bitter on my tongue. They weren't just thoughts, they were accusations, directed at me, and they echoed, louder than any voice in that room. I tried to push them away, focusing on the hum of the office, the faint scent of coffee lingering from the break room. But it followed me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I found a quiet corner near the window, the morning sunlight sharp against the glass, throwing harsh lines across the floor. I rested my forehead against the cool pane, letting my reflection stare back at me, a reflection that looked smaller somehow, defeated. The world outside carried on, cars rumbling past, distant footsteps, a dog barking somewhere far off. Everything was moving except me. Flashbacks crept in, uninvited but relentless. I remembered my first big project, the pride of presenting it to my team, the thrill of seeing nods of approval, of thinking, I belong here. And now, just like that, it felt like someone had erased years of effort, painting over every accomplishment with ridicule and doubt. The unfairness of it pressed in, heavy and stifling that I tried to steady myself, running a hand through my hair, gripping the edge of the window sill, counting silently. To 10. But the anger bubbled underneath, twisting with self-doubt. Why do I let them get to me? I worked harder than anyone here. The voice was small, fragile, but it was there, a tiny ember in the storm that I remembered the small comforts of home. The way my favorite mug feels warm in my hands, the smell of dinner cooking, the softness of the couch after a long day. They were distant now, but they reminded me that life wasn't entirely defined by this moment. Still, it was hard not to dwell on the sting, on the humiliation that seemed to cling to my skin like a second layer. I finally sat down at my desk, staring blankly at the computer screen, the cursor blinking back at me as though mocking my indecision. I realized I needed space, a pause, a moment to breathe before I could face anyone again. And in that pause, the realization sank in. Today had hurt, but it hadn't broken me. Not entirely. Somewhere, deep inside, I knew that the next step mattered. The choice to retreat and lick my wounds, or to rise again. And in that quiet corner of self-reflection, I chose to breathe, to acknowledge the pain, but not let it define me that I was still sitting at my desk, lost in the haze of what had just happened when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was another routine notification, maybe some meeting reminder or a flurry of emails. But the screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, unfamiliar and urgent, and something about it made my stomach tighten. Who's this? A mistake? I wondered, hesitating before swiping to answer. My hand hovered over the screen, unsure, almost afraid. I could feel the tension from earlier still lodged in my chest, and now it mingled with curiosity. Dangerous, thrilling, impossible to ignore. Lieutenant? The voice on the other end was sharp, commanding, clipped in a way that brooked no argument. We need you. Immediately, I blinked at the phone, trying to make sense of the words. We need me? Right now? My thoughts raced, circling between disbelief and hope. The humiliation from earlier still burned, but now it felt almost distant, overshadowed by this unexpected pull, this strange, urgent beckoning. The office around me faded into the background. I could hear the faint tapping of keyboards, the hum of the fluorescent lights, but it all felt muted, like I was underwater. I pressed the phone closer, straining to catch every word. Where? What? Who is this? There was no time for answers, just a sense of immediacy that made my pulse spike. My mind flashed back to earlier moments in my career. The first time I was called in for an urgent assignment, the thrill, the fear, the knowledge that I was trusted, needed, essential. That feeling, it hit me now like a wave, the hallway outside. My office seemed longer as I made my way toward the exit, phone pressed to my ear. My uniform, still crisp but now wrinkled from earlier tension, felt heavier, almost like armor against uncertainty. My notes from the meeting, forgotten on the desk, seemed trivial now, irrelevant. This isn't just an ordinary day, I thought, a spark of something unfamiliar flickering in my chest. Today, maybe it's going to change everything. As I stepped out into the sunlight streaming through the office doors, I felt the first hint of something new. Anticipation mingled with fear. I didn't know what awaited me, or why I had been chosen, but a quiet determination began to build. For the first time since the meeting, I felt the ember of purpose stir within me, fragile yet insistent, demanding that I follow wherever it might lead. I barely had time to process the urgency in the voice on the phone before a low, mechanical roar cut through the air outside. I froze, squinting through the office window, and that's when I saw it. A helicopter descending fast, its rotors slicing through the morning sky with a force that made papers on nearby desks flutter and scatter. My heart skipped a beat. This can't be real. Am I dreaming? The sound was deafening, a mix of raw power and imminent danger. I could feel the vibration through the floor, a pulse that seemed to sync with my own racing heartbeat. Coworkers who had been immersed in their screens moments ago were now staring, mouths slightly agape, frozen in disbelief. I stepped closer to the glass, shielding my eyes from the sunlight bouncing off the metal, and watched as the helicopter settled onto the small clearing outside the building. Its presence was sudden, dramatic, like something out of a movie. Wind whipped through the open doors, papers and dust spiraling in chaotic eddies, tangling in my hair and clinging to my clothes. The smell of fuel and metal burned faintly in my nostrils, and I realized my pulse had doubled, my senses entirely hijacked by the scene unfolding before me. That IT was surreal. Moments ago, I had been humiliated, crushed by ridicule, questioning everything I had worked for. And now this, a physical, undeniable manifestation of importance, urgency, and opportunity all at once. My mind struggled to catch up. A helicopter? Here? For me? I could feel the eyes of my coworkers on me, their earlier smirks and dismissive glances fading into sheer disbelief. Whispers ran through the room like static, everyone trying to make sense of what was happening. I wanted to speak, to explain, but even my voice seemed swallowed by the roar of the blades. Flashbacks began to creep in. Training exercises in early mornings, emergency drills, moments when I had been tested, pushed to the edge, and had survived. Every ounce of preparation, every lesson learned in patience and resilience, suddenly felt like it had been leading up to this exact moment. And now, standing there, watching the helicopter settle, I realized that the stakes had shifted entirely. Something inside me stirred, a mix of fear, disbelief, and a strange, exhilarating thrill. This was bigger than anything I had faced in that office. Bigger than humiliation, bigger than self-doubt. And yet, beneath it all, a small voice whispered, "This is your chance. Don't waste it." The office seemed to shrink around me as the helicopters' blades slowed, the deafening roar giving way to a tense, almost reverent silence. And then I heard it, a sharp, commanding voice cutting through the air, clear and precise. "Lieutenant, we need you." I froze, my hand instinctively gripping the edge of the windowsill. Me? Why now? After all of that? The words felt surreal, almost mocking in their timing, considering what had just happened in that meeting. And yet, they carried an authority I couldn't ignore, a weight that demanded action. Uniformed officers emerged from the helicopter with swift, practiced movements, their presence immediate, undeniable. Papers and documents were handed to me, crisp and official, edges sharp beneath my fingers. My heart pounded, not from fear, exactly, but from a sudden, strange surge of pride, of recognition. For the first time that morning, I felt seen, not by coworkers, not by my superior in the meeting, but by someone who mattered in the world I had trained to navigate. Flashbacks washed over me. Early mornings during training, the bitter cold, the endless drills that tested my patience and endurance. I remembered mentors pushing me beyond what I thought I could handle, insisting I stay focused, stay ready. "You never know when your moment will come," one had said. And somehow, today, that moment had arrived. Not as a reward for comfort or politics, but as a test of readiness, urgency, and capability. That I glanced back toward the office. The faces that had laughed at me earlier now stared wide-eyed, mouths slightly open, as if the universe had just flipped the script on them. Funny, just a few hours ago, their smirks had been sharp, cutting. Now, even their silence felt small and powerless. My chest swelled with a mix of disbelief and validation. Here I was, still slightly disoriented from the morning's chaos, yet undeniable in the eyes of those who mattered. I straightened my shoulders, ran a hand along my uniform, and felt that old ember of confidence flare, quiet, insistent, but alive. That I stepped forward toward the helicopter, the world around me hazy but electric. My mind raced, thoughts spinning, between past humiliation and present purpose. They laughed at me this morning. They had no idea what was coming. And yet, I kept the thought tucked inside quietly, letting it fuel me without arrogance, letting the reality of this sudden responsibility sink in. This was bigger than revenge, bigger than pride. This was a call, urgent, unavoidable, real. And for the first time in hours, I felt entirely, undeniably ready. The moment I stepped out of the office, everything seemed to change. The wind from the helicopter's rotors whipped around me, tugging at my uniform, messing with my hair, and carrying the sharp scent of fuel and metal. Papers from the earlier meeting danced across the pavement, caught in the chaos, like remnants of the humiliation I had endured. That I glanced back at the building, and that's when I saw it. The faces of my coworkers. Shock, disbelief, even a hint of fear. The same people who had mocked me, who had whispered and smirked behind my back, were now frozen, staring as if the universe itself had handed me a sudden, undeniable power. Their eyes widened, some mouths opening slightly, but no words came. The smirks were gone, replaced with a silent, stunned awe. I felt a strange rush of emotions, surprise, vindication, and a quiet, almost reluctant amusement. Funny, I thought. The same people laughing before can't even look at me now. And yet, I kept moving forward, not to prove anything to them, but because my purpose was waiting. The helicopter's ramp was a boundary, a portal from one reality to another, and stepping toward it meant leaving petty judgments and ridicule behind. Flashbacks flickered in my mind. The first time I had been underestimated, the moments when people had written me off, the sting of being overlooked. Each memory was sharp, but now tempered with perspective. Every sneer, every laugh, every subtle dismissal had led me here, to this moment, to this undeniable call that made all the earlier pain almost necessary. The sun caught the helicopter blades as I approached, sending sparks of light dancing across the metallic surface. The sound was deafening now, but it felt purposeful, energizing, like a drumbeat guiding me toward what I was meant to do. I felt a pulse of pride, not from revenge, not from proving anyone wrong, but from knowing that I had been ready, that I had persisted, and that the world had finally demanded my presence. Hands reached out to help me aboard, and I climbed into the cabin, the surge of adrenaline almost knocking the breath out of me. Below, the office seemed tiny, insignificant even, a place that had tried to define me but now felt like a distant memory. The rotor blades kicked up the wind, lifting dust and paper into the air, a visual echo of everything I was leaving behind. I settled into the seat, gripping the edge. I took a deep breath, feeling the shift in reality beneath me. This was no longer about humiliation or office politics. This was about purpose, urgency, and a call that demanded everything I had trained for. And in that moment, the laughter, the whispers, the judgments, they all faded into irrelevance. The moment my boots touched the helicopter's floor, reality shifted. The cabin smelled of fuel, metal, and faintly of leather, a scent that made my pulse quicken in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. I gripped the seat handles tightly, feeling the vibration of the blades through the floor, a rhythmic thrum that matched the pounding of my heart. As the ramp lifted, the ground dropping away beneath us, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration washed over me. I have no idea what's waiting, but I'm ready, I told myself, repeating it like a mantra. Outside, the city shrank, buildings becoming tiny blocks of gray and brown, the morning chaos reduced to a distant hum. I felt simultaneously small and powerful, a paradox that made the world seem impossibly wide and open. Flashbacks surfaced without warning. Early mornings during training, the biting cold, the endless drills, and the moments when failure felt imminent. Every hour of preparation, every ounce of discipline, every test I had endured, they all converged into this single, defining moment. And for the first time that day, I felt the weight of all that effort transforming into something tangible. Purpose. The roar of the rotors filled the cabin, drowning out any lingering doubt. I could feel the wind outside, the press of air through the open sections, the smell of fuel tangling with the scent of adrenaline. My mind raced, scanning possibilities, preparing for orders, thinking through contingencies. And yet, beneath the planning and the awareness, there was that pure, raw thrill, the sensation of being propelled into something larger than myself, something urgent, something meaningful. That I glanced at the faces of the officers beside me, each focused, each professional, each aware of the mission that lay ahead. And in that glance, I felt a connection, not just to them, but to the training, the discipline, the sacrifices that had brought me here. It was grounding, humbling, and empowering all at once. The city stretched out below us, a landscape of possibilities, of unknown challenges. My pulse steadied, adrenaline still flowing, but now tempered by clarity. The embarrassment from the meeting, the whispers, the judgment, they were gone, left behind in the office that now felt like a distant memory. This flight, this sudden upheaval, was no longer about anyone else. It was about me, my readiness, and my ability to step into the moment I had been trained for. whether I was ready to admit it or not. As the helicopter lifted higher, cutting through the sky, I leaned back slightly, letting the wind whip across my face, feeling the exhilaration surge through me. The world below was wide open, and for the first time that day, so was I. The helicopter climbed higher, the city shrinking beneath us into a patchwork of streets, rooftops, and the distant hum of life continuing without pause. I leaned back in my seat, letting the vibration of the blades hum through my bones, and finally allowed myself to breathe. The tension of the morning, the meeting, the ridicule, the doubt, felt distant now, like a storm I had walked through and emerged from, soaked but stronger. That I thought about the strange arc of the day. Hours ago, I had been humiliated in front of my coworkers, my confidence shredded by laughter and snide remarks. I had felt small, powerless, invisible, and now the world had shifted on its axis. A helicopter, a call, a mission, urgent, vital, and unmistakably mine. I realized how fragile perception can be, how quickly the ground beneath you can tilt, and how much perspective matters. Flashbacks played softly in my mind. The first time I had been underestimated, the sting of being overlooked, the quiet nights spent proving to myself that I could endure. Each memory, once painful, now felt like preparation, shaping me for moments exactly like this. Every humiliation, every doubt, every whisper of judgment had led to this clarity, this purpose. That I glanced at the officers around me, focused and efficient, each doing their part, and felt a quiet camaraderie. There was no judgment here, no pettiness, just a shared commitment to something larger than any one of us. And in that, I found a sense of closure. The humiliation that had weighed so heavily that morning had no power in this sky, in this mission, in this moment. The wind whipped across my face, carrying the scent of fuel and the faint tang of adrenaline. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling it all: the fear, the exhilaration, the thrill of being needed, the hum of the rotors beneath me. A strange peace settled over me, a quiet understanding that life's unexpected turns can be brutal, yes, but they can also be defining. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning. The day had taken me from mockery to purpose, from doubt to clarity. I realized that humiliation is temporary, but readiness, courage, and the ability to step into your moment, those are lasting. The city stretched below, wide and infinite, and I felt a quiet triumph, a gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, for the twists that had shaped me, and for the moment that was now mine to live. As the helicopter rose higher into the sky, I let the past drift away, replaced by focus, purpose, and the exhilarating certainty that whatever came next, I was ready.